There is really a lot of shared vision here, and that's great. I think we have a lot to discuss as we go forward. But first, let's also listen to Anu Madgavkar, who is a partner at McKinsey, and when it comes to insights on what's going on, it's safe to turn to McKinsey as well. So welcome.
Thank you. It's always tough to be the last speaker after all these visionaries have shared their vision, so I'll try to do my best. So I represent McKinsey Global Institute, which is the economics research arm of McKinsey. And one of the topics that we look at quite closely globally as well as in India is really the theme of technology and innovation. A couple of years ago, we had an opportunity to develop a piece of research which was global in nature and talked about 12 disruptive technologies and what kind of economic impact they would have all over the world. And then we were asked in India to actually then tailor that list of 12 technologies and really think about what are the application areas and the core technologies which are really relevant to India in the next decade. And that's essentially a piece of work we then did and we shared with the government, and we've been sharing it with industry folk. And as I think somebody said, the numbers constantly are changing and need to be updated simply because of the sheer speed at which things are evolving in India. This is just a sort of snapshot of what we felt were the 12 underlying types of technology that would have the maximum economic impact for India in the coming 10 years. So these are, I think it was Mats who said this, that these are not necessarily futuristic technologies. They're already here and now. But what is important about them is that you can see them reaching a tipping point of adoption such that mass-scale, very disruptive applications and uses start becoming viable, start becoming attractive, and really start proliferating and disrupting traditional business models. So a lot of these are in the areas of digital technologies. The whole of the first list, for example, mobile internet, cloud, automation of knowledge, really, automation into software, really, of knowledge-related work. And then digital payments and verifiable digital identity, which were not on our global list, but given in India the fact that policy had really pushed these two elements of digital financial inclusion, and then through the Aadhaar program, the formation of at least the basis of what can be a verifiable digital identity going forward, these were actually very, very relevant in India. And then the whole family of IoT as well. So what do we see as the potential for adoption for some of these? As you can see, across technologies, there is the J-curve that is kicking in already in terms of adoption, and we would see many of these exploding by a multiple of 10 in terms of adoption rates, reaching levels like 700 to 900 million smartphone and internet users. That number is already expected to be about 460 million this year, which takes India up to second position in terms of global internet users. But there is still a lot of growth that we would expect across each of these areas. We then thought about, if these technologies are really so ubiquitous, they're really available with a lot of consumers and end users, what's the sort of economic value that these users are going to derive from these technologies? And we thought through this across a range of sectors, from financial and healthcare and education to the more slow adopters of technology in India, at least, which are infrastructure, agriculture, and then the energy sector as well. And if you thought about what sorts of combinations of technologies can come together and create value for consumers, that scales to a number of upwards of $500 billion in terms of GDP equivalent or economic value equivalent in 2025, and has the potential to drive at least 20% of incremental economic growth for the nation. So easily the single largest driver of productivity and growth for India as a nation and for Indians as a set of people. A snapshot of some important and really massively scaling technology developments that we're seeing in India. As we speak, the government has actually enrolled 1 billion people 1 billion people. That's right. When we did this a few months ago, it was 817 million. We had to update it to 1 billion before today. Aadhaar cards. What is the Aadhaar card? The Aadhaar card assigns a unique number, so a unique digital identity to every person who holds the card, and captures your biometrics. And that goes into a database so that there is a unique individual identity mapped to a biometric signature for every person. That's just the first step. What is work in process and what is the intent is then to match or map, or as the government puts it, to seed these Aadhaar numbers into bank accounts of Indian citizens, and then use that as a platform to transfer benefits from the government in the form of pension payments, employment guarantee payments, subsidies for fuel or subsidies for fertilizer. The whole lot of government benefits can then be transferred directly to citizens. The missing part of the puzzle, other than the Aadhaar, was actually the fact that we had about 300 to 400 million people without bank accounts in India, not financially included, no access to savings accounts, payments, microcredit, or anything like that. What's interesting is that this family of disruptive technologies is actually enabling a lot of change on that dimension. There was a big push to open electronic bank accounts in the traditional banking sector, and that number rose by 115 million in the space of a year simply because of a big government thrust to make this happen. But what's even more exciting is actually the future, because there is now a regime of new payment banks who are empowered to use technologies like mobile and cloud and then actually deliver small savings and payment solutions to customers. And these need not be the banks, but there's a category that could include the telcos, the IT companies, microfinance firms, India Post. So a whole lot of non-traditional players can come into the savings and payment part of the space and really close this gap for India. A couple of just interesting stories of how we're seeing value unfold, which are a bit non-traditional, I would say. E-commerce is, of course, now traditional, right, in the space of digital disruption. And China has shown us that. And India's e-commerce space is very exciting as far as goods and products go. But what is even more exciting is I think India is a country of service. It's a services-driven economy. And as you think about e-commerce-like marketplaces for services, I think there's going to be an explosion of value, which all of these informal sector, micro-entrepreneurs, self-employed people who till now could not access opportunities very easily, mostly by word of mouth, very inefficient system of really finding an opportunity. If you are a driver or a tour operator or a cook or a chef, all of these kinds of small professions which are self-employed in nature and probably account for 50% of India's labor force, had very inefficient mechanisms to match demand and supply. This solution, which is already scaled to about 500,000 job seekers, what it does is at the cost of just 1 rupee a day, it gives the user who just needs to have a mobile and then one of those digital payment accounts, it gives that user the ability to get some help to create a biodata, post it up on the job search portal, and then gets access to other people like me, for example, who might be looking for such service providers but don't know where to go. So massive, at very, very low cost, reaching out to a segment and creating economic opportunities for them. The healthcare space is the other one where we see, and there are examples like this across sectors. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but in the healthcare space, this example talks about how in a rural part of the country, what they've done is essentially to embed a lot of intelligence into a handheld digital device, basically a tablet. And then that is used by a community health worker to go door to door in the rural community and do a lot of patient screening, capture a lot of parameters, physical parameters, use the intelligence in that app to then screen the patients or screen family members for what needs to be done, to schedule follow-up visits, to do the diagnostics, and so on. And by doing this, again, at very low cost, you're able to also overcome the big gap in human resources who are actually willing to go out and serve these rural communities. So technology can actually be very empowering because it does what you don't have human skills enough to do. The final thought is really, as digital India scales and really starts achieving its potential, what are some design principles which we think are important, necessary, and which we believe are somewhere work in process as the policies that shape digital India evolve? First of all, the fact that it's much more than digitizing the government. Digitizing the government is an important part of it, but there is a huge lot of value in digitizing small businesses, in digitizing services that reach consumers, and even in digitizing large companies and different parts of their supply chain and so on. The second is that it's got to be accompanied by an environment that really promotes entrepreneurship and innovation. We talked about this in the roundtable earlier as well, which is how do you create that system for innovators, startups, people with good ideas, to really use these technologies as platforms and build solutions that offer value to people. There is clearly a need to build high-quality, low-cost internet connectivity. There are a lot of different ways this can be done. There are telecom policies that influence that. We hope for more progress there. There is clearly need to address some demand-side barriers with there is low digital literacy in India, as you can imagine, in rural India, but also in urban India. What's great is that the technologies themselves provide many of the solutions. So the way the technologies support voice, for example, or video, or biometrics. So there's one set of enablement that comes through technology. There is another way, a very Indian way, which is the notion of the para-technician, which is to have common service centers or kiosks where IT literate people can actually help those who are not IT literate to access online services. And then finally, the fact that because India is ultimately a collection of states and many of the domain areas are actually part of state government policy, there is really a need to prevent fragmentation, to promote more interoperability, more portability, so that solutions developed in one part of India can truly be scaled to other parts. It is more challenging than it sounds, but I think the government is seized of the need to do this. But I'm sure it's a challenge everywhere. I'm sure you face the same challenge in the EU, for example. But just some principles that we believe are important, and we hope that many of these will move in the right direction in the years to come. Thanks.